I want you to just imagine a scene for a second, a scene that thousands of people go through every single year. You're sitting in a doctor's office, right?
Sure.
It's sterile, it's a little too cold, it has that sharp antiseptic smell. And your neurologist looks across the desk at you and says a phrase that basically splits your life into a before and an after. They say, "You have Parkinson's."
Right, which is what Alexander Reed, he's the founder of the European Parkinson Therapy Center, he calls it the atomic bomb moment. I mean, it's just a completely devastating shock to the system.
Exactly. In that split second, the future you had kind of like planned out in your head, it just evaporates.
Yeah.
And the fear, the anxiety, the depression that rushes in, it's totally normal, by the way. You're terrified because you just don't know what comes next.
Yeah, we're naturally afraid of what we don't know.
Right. And unfortunately, the standard medical intervention often just reinforces that terror. I mean, your neurologist probably has, what, a 20-minute slot for you?
If you're lucky, yeah.
Yeah, if you're lucky. They have very few real answers about your daily life, but they do have a prescription pad. You get some pills, a polite "see you in 6 months," and you're just left standing in the rubble.
And it feels like this downward spiral is just totally inevitable, right? The overarching narrative handed to the newly diagnosed is incredibly bleak. It really fosters this overwhelming feeling that you're just this passive victim of a relentless disease.
And this is the core of what we're talking about today, that's just not the whole story anymore.
No, not at all. The clinical data, especially the research coming out of that European Parkinson Therapy Center, it paints a drastically different picture.
Which brings us to the mission of our deep dive today. We're pulling from massive data on neuroplasticity and the curriculum from a newly diagnosed course called Vita Feliz, which translates to First Steps.
Right.
And the real truth, the reality backed by modern science, is that today, Parkinson's is not nearly as dramatic or definitive as you might think. You can actually fight back.
Yeah, you can regain a tremendous amount of control. Because, honestly, the most serious symptoms people experience early on are often amplified in their own heads.
Wait, really? In their heads?
Yeah, it's created by a sheer lack of understanding of what the disease actually is. Anxiety makes the physical symptoms so much worse.
Wow. Okay, so let's lay out the facts for you listening right now, because the numbers here are staggering. By the end of this deep dive, you're going to understand how, and this is without adding any extra medicines to your regimen, how a person can reduce their symptoms by up to 60%.
60%? It's huge.
It's massive. You can improve the biological absorption of the medications you're taking, increase your movability, drastically improve your quality of life, maintain your independence, and even restore the volume and clarity of your voice.
Right, which people don't even realize is connected. We're really talking about a deliberate transformation here. Moving from being a passive victim to becoming the active protagonist of your own life.
So how do we get there? Because a 60% symptom reduction without new drugs sounds, honestly, a little like magic.
It does, but to understand how it's biologically possible, we first have to completely dismantle the way we visualize the human brain. The way we've thought about the brain for the last century is actually part of the problem.
Are you talking about that old Victorian machine model?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So historically, the medical world viewed Parkinson's through the lens of the Industrial Revolution. We thought of the brain like a pocket watch, or a steam engine.
Right.
It's this closed system of gears, cogs, and a finite amount of fuel. So in this model, if a gear breaks, or in this case, if the dopamine-producing neurons in your substantia nigra start to die off, the machine simply slows down.
Right, and it can't be repaired.
Exactly. Eventually, it just stops.
I mean, viewing your own mind as a decaying machine, that breeds absolute despair. If a literal metal gear snaps in a watch, the watch can't fix itself. A broken gear doesn't just grow back.
No, it doesn't.
So if you internalize that metaphor, passivity is literally the only logical response. You just sit there in the dark and watch yourself break down.
But the modern scientifically backed view throws that whole machine metaphor out the window entirely. The brain is not a closed mechanical loop. It's a dynamic ecosystem. You have to think of it as a living, growing garden or like a dense forest.
Oh, I love that analogy. So if we use that forest analogy for the listener, imagine a massive ancient tree falls and just completely blocks your favorite, most used path through the woods.
Right.
The forest itself doesn't die. And you certainly don't stand there with a tube of super glue trying to reattach a dead tree trunk.
That'd be ridiculous.
Right. Instead, you put on your boots, you start trampling down the undergrowth, living bushes out of the way, and you slowly forge a brand new path right around the obstacle.
And that visual right there perfectly describes the biological process of neuroplasticity. The human brain is incredibly vast, and we really only regularly use a fraction of its capacity. You'll often hear it cited as around 10%.
So there's all this extra space.
Massive, untouched neural real estate available. When Parkinson's blocks a specific neural pathway that controls, say, your balance or your voice or your posture, neuroplasticity allows the brain to literally rewire itself. Synapses can physically bridge new gaps and create alternative paths around the damaged area.
But a garden doesn't tend to itself, right? You have to actively go out there with a machete and clear the brush. You have to put in the grueling daily work to forge that new path.
Yes, and that introduces the most insidious psychological barrier of this condition. In Parkinson's, the disease itself actively attacks the exact mental tools you need to do that gardening.
Which is so cruel, because if the brain can just forge new paths and bypass the damage, you'd wonder why so many newly diagnosed people end up isolating themselves. Like, why do they just withdraw from their lives?
It's because the disease attacks the brain's motivation center. Research calls this the vortex of apathy. And apathy affects anywhere from 40 to 70% of people with Parkinson's.
Wow, that's almost 3/4 of patients.
Yeah, and it is absolutely crucial to understand that this apathy is not laziness. It is not a moral failing or like some character flaw. It's a clinical neurological symptom caused by a severe lack of dopamine in what is called the mesocortical limbic pathway.
Okay, we should probably break that pathway down a bit, because it sounds incredibly dense, but it actually dictates so much of our daily behavior, doesn't it? The mesocortical pathway is basically the brain's internal accountant, right? It constantly performs a cost-benefit analysis.
That is a brilliant way to put it, actually. For anyone listening, just think about a time you were exhausted after work and trying to decide whether to go to the gym or just sit on the couch.
Oh, every day.
Right. Your brain weighs the immediate effort against the long-term reward. In a healthy brain, dopamine tips the scale toward the reward, giving you that motivation to get up.
Oh.
But in a Parkinson's brain, that dopamine accountant is missing. The brain literally cannot do the math anymore.
It just can't weigh the effort against the reward.
Ex-
So the effort always feels overwhelmingly high, and the reward feels totally non-existent. And the person just starts saying no. No to a morning walk, no to a family dinner party, no to physical therapy. And every time they say no, it's like a door locks.
And eventually they're sitting in a silent room, and all the doors are locked. And their body stops moving entirely.
Yeah.
And because they stop moving, the neuroplasticity shuts down, and the physical symptoms accelerate rapidly.
It's a psychological state triggering a devastating physical decline.
Right. So to fight this, the Vita Feliz curriculum and the European Parkinson Therapy Center utilize a psychological framework called the ACMA protocol. ACMA. Accept, comprehend, motivate, and action.
Okay, a sequential ladder out of the vortex. And it has to start with acceptance. But I have to say, I'm struggling with this acceptance idea.
How so?
Well, if my hand is shaking uncontrollably, or I'm shuffling my feet and I just sit there and accept it, isn't that exactly the passivity we're trying to avoid? It sounds a lot like resignation, like giving up.
Yeah, that is the most common misconception, and it is a really vital distinction to make. Resignation is saying, I'm broken, I give up. Acceptance is simply acknowledging the reality of the present moment without panic.
Without panic. Okay.
Right. Dr. John Kabat-Zinn's clinical work shows this physically happening in the brain. Using fMRI scans, researchers found that when a patient fiercely fights a physical sensation, like when they panic about a tremor and mentally scream, stop, 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 the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center, it just lights up like a siren.
And that panic triggers a full-blown systemic stress response, I'm guessing.
Exactly. The brain floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline, which physically increases muscle tension. And that added tension actually makes the tremor significantly worse.
Oh, man. It feeds itself.
But when a patient simply observes the tremor and accepts it without judgment, the amygdala stays completely quiet. Acceptance physically lowers the rigidity in the muscles. It's not giving up. It's de-escalating the nervous system so you can actually think clearly.
That makes so much sense. You can't fight back if your nervous system is in a constant state of red alert. Okay, so once you de-escalate, you move to the C in ACMA, which is comprehend.
Right, comprehension.
This is moving from utter confusion to true health literacy. And let's give the listener a concrete example of this from the sources, because this is fascinating. There's a common symptom called freezing of gait, right? Where a person's feet feel glued to the floor, often when they're like trying to walk through a doorway.
Yes, very common. And if you do not comprehend the disease, hitting a doorway and suddenly losing the ability to step forward is terrifying. You feel completely out of control. Your amygdala fires, your muscles lock tighter, and the freeze just deepens.
But if you comprehend the mechanics of the disease, you know that your legs are physically fine. The glitch is actually in the brain's spatial processing. It's temporarily overwhelmed by the visual transition of the doorway threshold. And because you comprehend that mechanism, you can manage the process. You can use a visual trick, like imagining a bright laser line painted on the floor just past the doorway, and you instruct your brain to simply step over the line. And suddenly, the freeze breaks. Knowledge physically reduces the threat response.
When you know why your body is doing something, you transition from suffering an unpredictable attack to managing a known biological process. It's incredibly empowering.
Okay, so you've accepted the reality to calm the nervous system, and you comprehend the mechanics of the symptoms. But that brings us right back to the catch-22 we discussed earlier. The MNACMA is motivate.
Right.
If the disease physically steals the dopamine required to initiate action, how do you find the motivation to actually do the visual tricks, or go to the gym, or, clear the path in the forest? Your chemical tank is literally empty.
Well, you have to hack the brain's reward loop.
Yeah.
The internal motivation is broken, so you must rely entirely on external motivation. The center refers to this with a brilliant, super pragmatic approach we can call the gelato method.
The gelato method. So you can't rely on abstract, long-term health goals.
Not at all. I mean, you do not tell a newly diagnosed person to go for a brisk, high-intensity walk because it will stimulate neuroplasticity and preserve dopaminergic function.
Right, that's way too clinical.
It's way too abstract for a dopamine-depleted brain to process as a reward. The mesocortical limbic pathway will just reject the effort. Instead, you say, we're going for a walk right now, and at the exact end of this walk, we are going to your favorite cafe and getting a massive scoop of gelato.
You're artificially manufacturing the reward to jumpstart the stalled engine.
Exactly.
You provide an immediate, highly tangible, undeniably pleasurable external reward, and through sheer repetition, you retrain the brain that action equals a guaranteed immediate payoff.
It totally bypasses the broken internal accountant.
So the gelato method gets you out the front door. But once you're on the sidewalk, what actually carves that new path in the brain? Because a casual, reluctant stroll is not going to release the biological fertilizer we need to rebuild the garden, is it?
No, it's really not.
And that brings us to the final A, action. How do we physically forge the new neural pathways?
We have to look at the concept of forced exercise, which completely revolutionized physical therapy for neurodegenerative diseases. It really gained traction through this fascinating accidental discovery by a neuroscientist named Dr. Jay Alberts.
Oh, the tandem bike story. Dr. Alberts is a serious competitive cyclist, right? He was participating in Ragbarai, which is this massive multi-day bike ride across the state of Iowa.
Yeah, it's grueling.
And he was riding a tandem bicycle, and the person on the back of the bike, the stoker, was a friend of his who'd been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
Right, and because Dr. Alberts was on the front of the tandem bike, he was setting a blistering athletic pace. His partner on the back had absolutely no choice but to pedal at his speed.
Because the pedals are locked together.
Exactly. She was literally forced to pedal much, much faster than her Parkinson's-affected brain would ever voluntarily allow her to go.
And when they finally got off the bike after hours of this intense, forced exertion, her tremors were practically gone. It's unbelievable.
Even more stunning, her handwriting, which had degraded into that tiny, shaky script, which is a classic symptom called micrographia, it had returned to completely normal size and legibility.
And obviously the scientific community had to figure out why this happened. They brought this phenomenon into the lab and realized it wasn't just the general effort of the exercise, it was the specific rate of movement. They discovered a magic number, 80 to 90 RPM, or rotations per minute.
Wow.
When you force a human body to exercise at a cadence roughly 30% higher than its voluntary comfortable comfort zone, it stops being just a workout.
So it's not the exercise itself doing the heavy lifting, it's the sheer RPM. You're effectively tricking your nervous system into manufacturing its own medicine.
Precisely. At that high forced cadence, the brain senses the intense mechanical demand and releases a massive surge of BDNF brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Let's really unpack BDNF for the listener because this is basically the holy grail of neuroplasticity. It is literal fertilizer for your brain's garden. It does two crucial things. First, it acts as a protective shield around your surviving dopamine neurons, preventing them from dying off as quickly.
Okay, so it protects what's there.
Yeah. And second, it actively stimulates dendritic branching, meaning it encourages the neurons to reach out and form brand new synaptic connections. It builds the new paths in the forest. But here's the catch-in. Your brain will hoard that fertilizer. You only get the BDNF release if you force the engine to run faster than the disease is telling it to.
So a casual walk while looking at your phone does not cut it. The effort has to be intense and deliberate, which aligns perfectly with the work of Dr. Becky Farley. She pioneered programs like LSVT, Big U, and PWR. Moves.
Her work is phenomenal.
Right, and her research points out that standard physical therapy is insufficient for Parkinson's. It has to be specialized neurotherapy. Her whole mantra is think before you move.
Because the disease causes a symptom called bradykinesia, which means movements become increasingly small and slow. The brain's internal scaling system just gets faulty. The brain genuinely thinks a tiny 2-inch shuffling step is a completely normal full-length stride. If a patient just walks on a treadmill while watching a television show, their cardiovascular system gets a workout, sure, but they are not fixing the neurological glitch in the brain.
It makes me think of sleeping with a cracked rib. Your automatic pilot, your subconscious, just wants to roll over onto your side in the middle of the night because that's what you've done for decades.
Oh, yeah.
But if you do, the pain is going to wake you up in agony. So you have to lie there and consciously, mentally force yourself to stay flat on your back night after night, overriding your instincts until staying on your back becomes your new normal.
That is the exact mechanism of neurotherapy. In Parkinson's, the physical hardware of the legs is usually perfectly fine, but the software, the autopilot, is glitching and sending the wrong signals. You have to switch off the autopilot and take manual control.
You have to force it.
Yes. You have to consciously, aggressively think, take a massive step, swing your arms wide.
And to the patient, it feels like they're doing these exaggerated comical lunges. But to anyone watching, it just looks like a normal human walking down the street.
Exactly. That intense, conscious, cognitive thought, combined with the physical movement, is the machete hacking the new path through the forest. It requires total presence.
So we have the mindset shift of ACMA, and we have the force exercise and neurotherapy to rebuild the brain. But a house with one wall can't support a roof.
No, it needs a foundation.
Right. And the European Parkinson Therapy Center emphasizes a holistic structure they call the Regen 4 pillars: medicine, movement, lifestyle, and psychology. We focused heavily on what you can achieve without medicine today, but we need to be crystal clear about Pillar 1. Medicine is not a failure.
Absolutely not. The clinical approach is deeply pragmatic. Medicine is not the enemy. Medicine is the fuel that makes the work possible.
Because you can't possibly pedal a stationary bike at 90 RPM if your leg muscles are completely locked up in severe rigidity.
Exactly. The levodopa, the dopamine agonists, they provide the baseline fuel to unlock the body so you can actually get on the bike and perform the neurotherapy that releases the BDNF.
And we're on the precipice of a monumental shift in that medical pillar, too. The research sources point to 2025 and 2026 as pivotal years in neurology.
It's a really exciting time.
It really is. We're finally moving away from drugs that merely mask the symptoms and entering the era of true precision medicine. There are drugs in late-stage trials right now, like tavapadon, which target highly specific dopamine receptors to give a much cleaner effect with significantly fewer side effects.
But the real game changers are the alpha-synuclein antibodies.
Let's unpack how those actually work, because it sounds like science fiction. Parkinson's is fundamentally driven by these toxic, misfolded proteins called alpha-synuclein that clump together and spread from one brain cell to the next.
It's almost like a slow-moving chain reaction or an infection within the brain.
Right. And these new antibodies are engineered in the lab to act essentially as microscopic bouncers. They don't just mask a tremor. They're designed to intercept these toxic proteins in the synaptic space between the cells, binding to them and clearing them out before they can infect the neighboring healthy neuron.
They halt the chain reaction entirely. They aim to modify the actual trajectory of the disease,
Yeah.
protecting the garden from further damage at a cellular level.
It's a massive paradigm shift from symptom management to actual disease modification.
It's huge.
So the science is advancing rapidly, the physical therapy protocols are incredibly effective,
Hmm.
but there's one final crucial element to this ecosystem, and it has to do with the people surrounding the person diagnosed, the families.
Yes?
And our sources from the Vita Phyllis curriculum brought up a really profound point about the word caregiver. They argue that we need to drop that word entirely because it is actively harmful.
It is harmful because language shapes our reality. The term caregiver inherently creates a stark hierarchy in a relationship. It subconsciously implies that one person is the capable, healthy provider, and the other person is a passive, helpless receiver.
It completely strips the agency away and casts the person with Parkinson's right back into the role of the victim.
Exactly.
But it's a tough dynamic to critique, right? Because if a loving partner, out of total devotion and fear, steps in and just completely takes over all the daily tasks to be helpful, tying their shoes, cutting their food, managing their calendar, aren't they actually accelerating the physical decline because of the strict use it or lose it rule of neuroplasticity?
Yes, they are. And it is a heartbreaking dynamic because it's born entirely out of love and a desire to protect. But when a spouse takes over those complex tasks, they inadvertently foster what psychologists call an illness identity.
An illness identity.
Yeah. The diagnosed person begins to view themselves solely as a sick patient. They lose their autonomy and their dignity. And biologically, if you stop performing a fine motor task like tying a shoelace, the brain assumes you no longer need that skill, and it literally prunes those neural pathways away. You lose the ability forever.
The extreme kindness actually backfires and becomes a catalyst for the disease.
So the center promotes a much healthier philosophy for families. Darling, if you need me, I'm here.
I love that.
The family member remains a partner, a spouse, a child. They do not become a nurse. You have to allow the person you love to struggle a bit with their coat zipper or their shoes because the cognitive and physical struggle is the exact friction required to keep those neural pathways alive and firing.
And stepping back protects the partner, too. I mean, the burnout associated with this disease is immense.
It's clinically recognized as compassion fatigue. It is absolutely vital that partners apply the oxygen mask rule you hear on airplanes. You must secure your own mask before assisting others.
Right. If a partner completely exhausts their own physical and mental health trying to provide 100% perfect, frictionless care, the whole family system just collapses.
Taking time for yourself, leaving the house to engage in your own hobbies, seeking independent emotional support. That is not selfish. It is the fundamental requirement for the long-term survival of both people.
So when we zoom out and look at the entirety of this deep dive, the Vita Phyllis course, the ACMA protocol, the tandem bikes, the antibodies, the core message for anyone facing a diagnosis is not really about a specific daily exercise routine or a new pill.
Yeah.
It's about a fundamental shift in human identity. You are not a broken Victorian steam engine just waiting for the gears to inevitably stop turning. You are the active, conscious gardener of your own mind.
You retain your agency. The diagnosis undeniably changes the landscape of your garden, and it places massive obstacles in your path. But it does not take away your intrinsic biological ability to cultivate it. With acceptance, comprehension, forced conscious effort, and the right partnership, you can forge incredible new paths.
Which leaves us with a fascinating broader thought for everyone listening. If a human brain that is under active, aggressive attack from a neurodegenerative disease can physically rebuild itself through forced, high-intensity effort, what does that mean for the rest of us?
Oh, it's the ultimate mirror held up to how we live our lives.
Yeah.
Whether you have a medical diagnosis or not, neuroplasticity is a universal human trait, and it strictly follows the rule of use it or lose it.
Right. If a Parkinson's patient can rewire their brain to overcome a tremor, a healthy aging brain has absolutely no excuse not to do the same. Are you actively gardening your mind? Are you forcing yourself out of your comfortable, lazy routines, pedaling a little faster than you actually want to, and trampling down the brush to learn new skills?
Or are you just sitting back in the dark watching the leaves fall and blaming it on getting older?
It's a deliberate choice we all have to make every single day.
Every day.
Something to mull over on your next brisk walk, hopefully with a scoop of gelato waiting for you at the end. Keep digging, keep learning, and keep watering your own garden. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.